This episode of Hansel Minutes is brought to you by Partner Hero. Partner Hero provides customer service outsourcing that's built for the needs of scaling and high-growth startups. They offer flexible terms, fast onboarding, and the ability to scale teams quickly, which is great for fast-growing businesses. Now, in the past, outsourcing has had a bad reputation for being exploitative or somewhat, low quality. But Partner Hero's values-based approach really raises the bar. They pay above-market salaries. They have a focus on quality and performance. And unlike most business process outsourcing companies, their management team includes individuals from the startup world. So they're more than just a service provider. They're a thought partner for the startups that they serve. They've got flexible terms. They've got offices around the world. So they have truly global coverage, including onshore, nearshore, and offshore options. Now, outsourcing has long been available to many big enterprises, but Partner Hero is challenging businesses as usual with short, flexible contracts and fast ramp-up times. If you're ready to bring in outside customer support help for your startup that feels like it's a part of your existing team, check out Partner Hero. Head on over to partnerhero.com/HanselMinutes to book a free consultation with their solutions team. Mention that you heard about Partner Hero from Hansel Minutes and they'll waive the setup fee. That's partnerhero.com/HanselMinutes. Hi, I'm Scott Hansel, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Ifeoma Ajunwa. She's a 2021-2022 Fulbright Scholar, an award-winning tenured law professor at the University of North Carolina School of Law, and adjunct professor at the Keenan Flagler Business School. She's also a founding director of Artificial Intelligence Decision-Making Research Program and a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. Dr. Ajunwa, thanks so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott.
So I have been spending time, very lucky to be looking at an unreleased version of your book that's currently in process called The Quantified Worker. We don't know when people will be listening to this show, but whenabouts will that be available?
So, there's been some production delays, given all the supply chain issues we've been having. So it may come out in April, but it seems like it's closer to May at this point. But yeah, hopefully soon. The pre-order link is, however, up on my website, and it's available at all the, major retailers, Barnes & Nobles, Amazon, all of those places.
Very cool. I will be sure to put a link to that in the show notes. And I've been as I said, very fortunate to be able to read a proof of that. And you talk about how the information revolution that we're all currently in the middle of right now is starting a data-driven reorganization of the workplace. Certainly in the last couple of years, we've all felt ourselves be reorganized to being remote. But this idea of data driving workplace decisions is not a new one, is it?
No, it's definitely not a new one. I mean, as far back as, the early 19th century with the Industrial Revolution, and then people like, Francis Taylor and his idea of scientific management, where it was all about minutely observing workers and recording their outputs and inputs. We've always had this idea really of recording what workers do, gathering data on what workers do, and using that to make managerial decisions. What is different, however, is we now have technology far advanced than what even Taylor would have imagined, right? So with Taylor, what you had was really people with clipboards walking around making notes. But now you have productivity applications that can be indefatigable, right? And can follow the worker perpetually. You have other surveillance of workers, including things like GPS trackers for company cars, sensors that would notice where a worker was positioned on, say, a factory floor, and things like that. So you just have so much more technology with more advanced capabilities of surveillance and monitoring.
As I was reading the book, I kept waffling back and forth, not knowing how I should feel, because my initial feeling is like, as an engineering-minded person, it's like, well, that's a good idea. We should count that. And then as a consumer and also as a worker myself, I'm like, I don't want to be counted like that. So I was going back and forth thinking, well, this is evil. Well, that's useful. And this is evil. And I'm not understanding where I should put all of these feelings.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the main goal for the book really is awareness, right? I don't want to push any sort of like ideological agenda on anyone, but I do want people to be critical in terms of examining these technologies and the way they're deployed and really reflect on, is this the sort of workplace that you feel would be most conducive for the human spirit, of because at the end of the day, workers are still human beings. And I just kind of wanted to sort of alert us again to that fact that we can't really reduce humans to numbers, and that we are essentially allowing, in some ways, mechanical processes to take over sort of differential judgment making that should be left to like managers, human managers, choose who can think a little bit more holistically in terms of the worker. So I guess my point with the book is, I do try to be a little even handed. I definitely recognize that the employer has a vested interest, of course, in productivity, right? The employer wants the worker not to soldier, as, Taylor put it, right? Where they go off and just do their own thing instead of like working for the organization. But on the other hand, the worker also has a vested interest in having some sort of human autonomy, human privacy, human dignity. And it's really all about thinking about how do we balance these two interests. And I think, one thing I hope the book shows is that those two interests are not really as antagonistic as you might think. Some of the research that I talk about in the book actually finds that over surveillance actually decreases productivity, right? So the idea is that by actually allowing your workers more autonomy, by allowing your workers more dignity, by giving them more privacy, that actually can increase productivity, thus giving, the employer what they're seeking.
You definitely succeeded in not making it political. You are not picking a side other than the side of awareness, but you do make a really interesting point that I want to actually quote from in your first chapter, where you say technology is never neutral. Embedded in both its design and use cases are theories of what is and what ought to be. So by definition, the worker with the clipboard has an idea that we're not working efficiently enough. Therefore,
Okay.
I will use this technology, the clipboard, to
Right.
imagine a better world where we are more efficient.
Right.
So
Right.
now we have AI and iPads and cameras and all of this. Maybe that's just the modern clipboard, but the assumption is we should be optimally efficient to the point of what?
Right.
Our hands bleeding and falling off? Like
Right.
when
Right.
do we stop?
Yeah. And I think, that's what we kind of want to question, right? What does efficiency look like truly? And efficient for whom, right? Because what's efficient for the manager might not actually be efficient for the worker. There's in organizational theory, there's this concept of practical drift. And that's actually the idea that workers actually usually will come up with the most efficient way to do things if you let them be, because they're the ones on the front lines, they're the ones on the ground. But unfortunately, when you have a lot of managers, they can impose, right, their own vision of what's efficient on the worker without necessarily testing out or knowing for sure that that's efficient. And, more to this idea of that, technology is not always neutral, and its use cases can also not be neutral. It's interesting for me when I was doing the research for the book to find that technology that was created for one purpose, which might be frankly a noble purpose, a good purpose, can, however, be sort of like appropriated for a different purpose than even the designers imagined. In the book, the chapter that really delves into that is automated hiring, right? Because for many people, automated hiring was supposed to be actually a good intervention. It was supposed to be a noble intervention where, managers are saying, well, we know human bias exists, right? Employees are saying, we know there's human bias in here in hiring, right? Whether it's, unconscious bias, where people don't trust the skills of people who don't look like them, or even if it's outright racial or gender animus. We do know that human bias exists in hiring. So then the idea is let's turn to automated hiring, because that's a way to reduce that human bias. In theory, that sounds great, right? That sounds like it's giving everyone a fair shake. But the problem, however, is that the way automated hiring is deployed can actually still be insidious and discriminatory, and therefore still resulting in unfair outcomes.
And additionally, in that chapter on automated hiring, you point out that in a Pew Research study, that 76% of Americans stated that they do not want to apply for jobs if they knew, in fact, there were computer programs making hiring decisions. So we find ourselves saying, who asked for this? If no one
Right.
wants it, who asked for this?
Right. Like I said, a lot of it is also a bandwagon effect, right? Once a technology exists and say one company adopts it, right? This is part of organizational theory, then other companies say, oh, wow, that major company is using this technology. We need to jump on that or we're behind, right? We don't want to seem like we're not with the times. We don't want to seem like we're missing out on efficient technology. And I would really caution employers to just be a little more reticent, before adopting any kind of like new technology whole scale. It might actually behoove them to like bring in people, consultants to say, let's test this technology before we just roll it out. Like, yes, other people are jumping on this technology, but let's audit it. Let's test it out. See if it actually does what it claims to do before we roll it out for our corporation.
It feels, though, that that would require a level of introspection and organizational willpower that not all of our corporations necessarily have. You quote a gentleman named Thorstein Veblen in one of your chapters where he talks about technocratic consciousness. And you actually have some really cool words here that really hit me. You picked just the right word in a number of places in this book where you talked about how we think about these things can be both techno-determinist and techno-fatalistic. And I was like, oh man, I feel techno-fatalistic sometimes because
I
you're
do
just,
too.
yeah. How do
Yeah.
you feel about that though? You're describing like simply being aware of the problem at the C-suite level could allow someone to make a decision and say, we're not going to do that just because the street demands it. But again and again, we seem to have those fatalistic and technocratic decisions getting made.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is frankly a big path, a big part of our societal ethos that, we think so many solutions can be solved with more technology, right? There is that techno solutionism present in our society now. And, yes, of course, I will readily admit that a lot of technology is useful. A lot of technology has utility to help us live more efficient lives, easier lives. But I think we also sometimes need to just step back, just because, like the adage, right? It's like, just because you have a hammer, you're going to start seeing nails everywhere, right? That needs to be smashed in. And, obviously that's not always the case. So when we do have problems, like let's say, oh, our organization is not diverse, right? We may want to step back and think, well, maybe an automated hiring program isn't necessarily going to fix that. Maybe what we want to examine is, are we creating the type of workplace where minorities, women would want to work, right? Are we able to attract that kind of talent? Or even just step back and say, oh, if we think it's a pipeline issue, which frankly, it's usually a canard. It's usually not a pipeline issue. But let's say we think it's a pipeline issue, then shouldn't it be, let's create the pipeline, right? Right? Automated hiring is not going to fix a leaky pipeline. So I do think, there just needs to be a little more introspection, a little more sort of like self-investigation when it comes to corporations and how they go about resolving issues that they have.
And while that puts the onus kind of on all of us as a collective to think about such things, you point out in the book that legal scholars are starting to, you say, buck the passivity of techno-fatalism and say that people deserve more than just the computer said so. So are we seeing
Yes.
more laws pushing back on this? Because I just want to remind our audience that you are a professor of law, so you have a bridge in the technology world and in the legal world, and that's what the book is bridging.
Right. I do note that the law is, small c conservative, right? The law moves very slowly. And one big problem is the law, because it moves so slowly, is usually not able to keep a pace with technological developments, and also even the different ways that technological developments impact society. I would say that yes, attention is being paid. So, for example, later this month, I'll be actually testifying before the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And this is an agency, a federal agency that's really thinking through the issues inherent with automated hiring and what to do, what regulations. So there is some momentum in terms of engendering new regulations to ensure, right, that this technology is being deployed in the workplace are not tampering with, bedrock principles of law like equal opportunity, for example.
This episode of Hansel Minutes is brought to you by User Interviews. User Interviews connects researchers with quality participants. Participants earn money for their feedback on real products. There is high demand for software developers and engineers to provide feedback on products being created for developers. It's free to sign up, and most studies are less than an hour and pay over $60. Some studies pay several $100s for a one-on-one interview. You can share your opinions with top brands, Adobe, Intuit, Spotify, Amazon, and many more. Are you ready to earn extra income from sharing your expert opinion? Head over to userinterviews.com/hello to sign up and participate today. That's userinterviews.com/hello. You also talked not just about worker productivity, which is where the scientific measurement started, but also that we can apply this lens to worker behavior, which is even more concerning. If you apply that to hiring, it might be, simply Googling for someone ahead of time, and then you find something you don't like about their Instagram, which has nothing to do with their job. You're like, oh, that's
Right.
not our kind of people. I didn't like their Cancun vacation and what they were doing on their
Right.
vacation. It's certainly no one thought about that in
Right.
150 years ago, but now that could even be shipped out to an AI. So today I Google
Right.
for my next date or my next employee. Tomorrow maybe the computer does that work for me, which becomes even more of a problem.
Right. The computer is already doing that work. There are programs that do that, that essentially will trawl the web and collect all information on candidates. Some states have started to make that sort of, candidate research illegal. So some states are prohibiting that. But, it is still difficult, of course, to catch employers doing that because they're not necessarily going to disclose that they've done that. And, that is also a big part of the issue. Some states even found that employers were asking candidates to hand over their social media passports, such that, the employee could then check what the employee or potential employee was doing on their social media. One big issue that I note in the book is that we're now really seeing an erosion between the line, we're seeing an erosion of the line between work and non-work. And that's problematic. It's problematic not just for, individual privacy, but it's actually problematic for democracy. Because if the employer has so much control over an employee's life that stretches into even the non-work behavior, then that employer could start dictating, right, political beliefs of the employee, for example. And we've seen that play out, right? We've seen, for example, certain tech titans tweeting about what behavior they expect, right, from the employees when it comes to, for example, organizing, right? Employees that try to organize unions and were essentially retaliated against, which is very much unlawful. But yeah, I mean, I think the issues I raise in this book, I really want people to note that it's not just an individual issue. It's not just about the individual worker. It's really about its impact on society and our ideals.
It makes me think about maybe 15, 20 years ago when they started having different rules for smokers versus non-smokers, and your health insurance would change. And as a non-smoker at the time, I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. But then I'm also like 4 sodas deep or four
Right.
Red Bull. There's all kinds of things I'm doing that are wrong behaviors. And then if you apply the idea of the quantified worker to this, everyone's got an Apple Watch. I certainly don't want my insurance policy to change because I didn't do my 10,000 steps that day. It can
Exactly.
get quite not just discriminatory, but really punitive based on
Right.
behaviors that are really up to me that have nothing to do with my job very, very quickly. And we're seeing those health systems already being attached to these devices that we have.
Right. And one way that that's done in a very sort of insidious manner is the workplace wellness programs, right? The corporate wellness programs. And those wellness programs are presented as a benefit, right, to the employee. And it's presented that, the employee can voluntarily sign up for them. But obviously, the other side of that is that you may not get your premiums, your health care premiums paid if you don't sign up. So the voluntariness becomes a little bit shaky, right? When it's like, okay, well, you either have to pay thousands of dollars a year for healthcare premium or you sign up for the corporate wellness program. Well, most people will have no choice but to sign up, right? And then what's more alarming to me is that all that data, all that health data, all that personal health data that's collected as part of workplace wellness programs, there's actually no regulation as to whether that can be ported elsewhere. And, I wrote an article before I wrote the book for the Harvard Business Review where I know that actually that data is getting sold. Nobody knows where their health data is when they sign up for the workplace wellness program. That data can be sold to any sort of data broker, and it does get sold without the consent or even the knowledge of the worker.
I want to take a second and with a brief hijack because I think you might get a kick out of this. I didn't tell you this, but I'm a type 1 diabetic. I have an
Okay.
insulin pump, I have an artificial pancreas, and I'm active in a community called We Are Not Waiting, which is a data freedom and take control of your body kind of a group of people who want diabetics to have all the blood sugar information, all that data that we're generating with our bodies to be in our control.
Yeah.
20 years ago, I reverse engineered blood sugar systems so that I might connect a wire to them and download my blood sugar into like Microsoft Excel. And
Uh-huh.
the blood sugar strips, as you probably know, because we all have an auntie or an uncle who's diabetic, they cost about $1 a strip. And you
Uh-huh.
would put them in, you test your blood sugar. I now receive a blood sugar meter from my company as part of our workplace wellness insurance program that has unlimited test strips. That's the thing that they.
Wow.
So I'm like, this is great. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. But when I receive the device, it has a cell phone built in and it automatically uploads my blood sugar data to I don't know
Who
where.
knows where?
Doesn't even need Wi-Fi. So
Wow.
I didn't realize that I was being gifted something, because they said free test strips.
Right,
Well, what did
right.
I sell? What price were those unlimited test strips?
Exactly, exactly.
We need to educate people to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah. So I guess there's like a famous saying that says something like, when you don't know the price of the product, then you are the product, right? Like
Yep.
your information is a product. So yeah, we really do want to be cognizant, right, of all these like data acquisitions. So moving away from the health sector, another place that I see, where this sort of acquisition is an issue, this data acquisition is an issue, is when it comes to automation of work. So in the book, I come up with this term, which is captured capital. Essentially, I make the argument that because of all the technologies we have now that are minutely watching workers, minutely collecting data on them, employers are actually capturing capital from workers because they're using that information to then actually automate the workers' jobs. So basically, the data that's derived from workers can in turn be used to put those workers out of jobs because then it's used to figure out how to get a machine to do that work. And I make the argument that if that's the case, then we actually want to build in a way for workers to be reimbursed for that data, since it will then in the future essentially enrich the employer, the corporation, because we don't have a universal basic income currently, right? So all these workers who are made redundant, right, by automation, they become the problem of society, right? Because there's no way for them necessarily to get an income, right? Once they've been let go, unless we actually think about coming to some sort of agreement with the corporations, right? To help them get capital or reskill them or upskill them so they can get other jobs. So I just think that's an important thing for us to also think about, that this, information that's being acquired is not just about loss of privacy. It's not just about, oh, I want to keep it private. I want to, keep my dignity, but it's also about economics. It's about the bottom line.
Yeah, that captured capital can be observing the worker and their behavior as they work and then making it more efficient, whether it be a giant iPad at McDonald's that now I no longer need someone to talk to a human. I'll just
Exactly.
or
Exactly.
whether it be something more like we're seeing AI, where the training data, where is that coming from? I've just made
Right.
an AI that can do art. Who did the original art? And that can be very
Exactly.
questionable legally as well.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
you call out though that one might be listening to this podcast and say, well, they're anti-technology. We're going to be Luddites now. This is nonsense. It sounds like what I'm really hearing you kind of preach is an intentionality. Let's
Right.
intentionally and deliberately look at this and apply appropriate regulation, because we really have to decide, who are we as a culture?
Sure. As a society.
Yeah, as a society, rather
Yeah.
than just letting the iPads rule.
Right. So yeah, I certainly am not anti-technology. One of the things I write about in the book is like, even the term Luddite is really misunderstood in our society. So the Luddites, what were they? They were like artisan workers, and they rebelled not against, the new technology, but they rebelled against the way work was being reorganized, where their skill wasn't being respected, where they were now being forced to like just do things in a very mechanical way. So they weren't really rebelling against the technology itself. They were rebelling against the way the work was being reorganized. So for me, that's the point of this book. I'm not saying, oh, automated hiring programs should never ever exist. I'm not saying productivity applications should never ever exist. I'm saying we actually want to be really sort of reflective and thoughtful about how we deploy these technologies to make sure they're not actually working at counter, effect to what we want to achieve, to the goals. I would posit that an employer's paramount goal is, yes, productivity and efficiency. But then the research has also shown that over surveillance actually kills productivity and efficiency. So then when you are deploying technology, you want to think about, is this technology actually helping the worker, or is it making the worker feel demoralized, devalued, quantified, right? Dehumanized. So yes, not anti-technology, very much pro-worker and very much pro-society in terms of making sure that anything that we're doing is actually for the betterment of all of us, of society.
I've been seeing, I'm on TikTok, which was very likely a huge mistake, but I see a number of young people on TikTok kind of railing against the machine. And one of the things that I see as a common meme amongst information workers is that my boss or my work is monitoring that I'm at work based on whether I'm moving my mouse or not. So inevitably, they build a tiny robot that moves the mouse,
Exactly.
and then they go back to sleep. And it makes me realize that technology can go both ways. Certainly, it can be used against
Right.
you, but the clever worker can turn it around on you. But does
Exactly.
it help them? No, it helps no one to monitor whether my mouse is moving and whether I'm at work.
Exactly. Exactly.
That is absolutely awful. Without legal interventions, you say that these new technologies are really poised to automate bias, and specifically automate the bias of the power elite. That's really interesting. They have a bias. It may be conscious, it may be not, but then they put together a framework that does all the work of being biased for them.
Exactly. One of the examples I use in the book, I think is really telling, right? So, as part of my research, I found this story of an attorney who had been hired by a corporation to basically audit the automated hiring system. And, they had trained the automated hiring system on the resumes, right, of the top workers. And they were going to use this to hire people. So then the attorney was like, all right, well, as part of our audit, we want to ask what's actually the top two factors, right? That based on how you've trained this machine, the machine thinks matters the most for picking, workers for you. And the answer was, the first was that the person was named Jared, right? The first name Jared. And the second was that the person had played high school lacrosse. And, just unpack that, right? On its face, the machine is not being discriminatory, right? Because it's not saying, oh, you have to be an exact, race, or you have to be, the specific gender, right? It's not saying that. But if it's according preference to people named Jared, well, I did my research. I went to the Social Security Administration website and I looked at the prevalence of the name Jared and who has that name in the United States. Well, over 90% of the people named Jared are male. Similarly, over 90% of the people named Jared are white. So essentially, this machine then is, with the use of proxy variables like Jared, privileging white males. You might also wonder, okay, why high school lacrosse? Like, that seems innocuous enough. It's just some random sport. And maybe what the machine is doing there is, this person played a team sport, right? We want a team player. But then you should ask yourself, there are so many different team sports. Why specifically high school lacrosse? Why not football? Why not basketball, right? Those are also team sports. Well, once again, I did my research. High school lacrosse is actually a very expensive sport to play in terms of the equipment. And you will find high school lacrosse in high schools that are in affluent neighborhoods, right? Because of the way we organize high school education, or, education in the US is based on property taxes. So affluent schools have high school lacrosse, and affluent schools are located in affluent neighborhoods. Now, with the history, right, of residential segregation in the US, affluent neighborhoods are most likely to be white neighborhoods or majority white neighborhoods, right? So once again, you land on race. So even though this automated hiring program had picked out these two seemingly innocuous variables, neutral variables, it was actually using proxy variables for mostly race and gender, right? That's going to be somebody male.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, those things are very interesting because I tried to explain this to a coworker once, and they were saying, "Well, wait a second, you're saying the computer is racist." And I said, "Well, hang on. We're not saying the computer's racist. We're saying it's not racist. And there's a
exactly,
difference, right? It's
exactly.
not actively not racist. And what's happening is, like, another example might be Highlight, which is not offered anywhere near me, but is offered in the private school 30 miles east of here,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and you can go and follow those backwards. And I could also even say behavioral, like I could say, well, the best programmers like Star Wars, and
Right,
then
right.
exclude an entire group of people who didn't grow up with that
Exactly.
innocuous variable, but I'd end
I'm
up
more of a
hiring
Trekkie
people.
myself, so
There you go. So then you can't work for me, and now here we are.
yeah.
Well, that example and many, many other examples are in the book, which is going to be available soon. It's called The Quantified Worker: Law and Technology in the Modern Workplace. What a joy to chat with you today. I appreciate you spending time with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott. It's been a pleasure.
We've been chatting with Dr. Ifeoma Ajunwa. You can check out her book at ifeomaajunwa.com, EFEOMA-AJUNWA.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.